Welcome back to the deep dive. So you've shared some really quite dramatic excerpts with us today.
Hmm.
It's this compelling story, though quite heartbreaking, really, about a king, his lost bird, and, well, the pretty disastrous actions of his advisors.
Yeah, it's quite the tale.
So we're going to really dig into these sources you've brought, unpack how this whole thing, a simple disappearance just spiraled into tragedy.
Exactly. And these bits you've provided, they paint such a vivid picture, don't they? A kingdom just completely rocked by what seems like, on the surface, a personal loss for the king.
Right.
But it's fascinating to trace how that initial event just sets off this chain reaction, leads to some very tough decisions for the king down the line.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit based on what you've given us. A whole year. A full year has gone by since the king's beloved bird just vanished.
Mm-hmm.
You can just imagine the mood in the court, right?
Oh,
A year of searching, nothing. That really says something about how much that bird meant to him, wouldn't you say?
oh, absolutely. For that much time to pass with no answers, it really underlines how deep that connection was. And as the story goes on, we see just how much this loss impacts everything.
Then we meet these two characters, Bidrup and Bankum. They're called wise men in the source.
All eyes men, yeah.
But as we look closer at these excerpts, their approach to finding this bird, the king's Moyna, it seems anything but wise. They go off on this mission to other kingdoms,
Right.
supposedly to search for it. But their method, it involves killing any bird of that type they find. It's pretty brutal.
It's disturbingly final, isn't it? Their whole approach, instead of, actually searching, they just resort to this mass elimination.
Yeah.
And what's really striking, looking at the sources you shared, is the king apparently told them to talk to the rulers in these other kingdoms about his problem.
Ah, okay. So a diplomatic angle initially.
It seems like it suggests maybe he wanted cooperation information, but Bidrup and Bankum, they just completely ignored that part. What do you make of that disconnect?
Well, it suggests they either didn't get it or maybe they just took a cynical shortcut, thought this was faster.
Could be. A fatal shortcut, as it turns out.
But then, just as things seem really grim, nature throws a potential lifeline. Winter comes.
Mm-hmm. Seasons change.
And with it, migratory birds arrive. So the king, and you can understand why, right? He's desperate.
Of course.
He sees this as a chance. Maybe his bird is among them. So he hires even more people, ramps up the search again.
And this renewed effort, it's highlighted in these excerpts you found, it shows he hasn't given up. He's still holding on to hope, actively trying to find a solution.
Yeah, he's not just sitting back resigned.
No, definitely not.
But the searchers come back, and the news isn't good. Lots of birds, they say, but not the bird, not his specific Moyna.
That must have been crushing. Another dead end.
Right. And here's a really interesting moment you shared from the sources. The king seems to have this internal struggle. He realizes, wait a minute, just harming or capturing all the birds, that's not right. It would be an injustice.
This is such a critical point. It shows a kind of ethical awareness in the king, even while he's in so much pain.
Yeah.
He sees this bigger picture, that his personal grief shouldn't justify hurting countless innocent creatures. What does that tell us about him, especially given what happens next?
Well, it sets up a really stark contrast, doesn't it? Because right after this moment of clarity, Bidrup and Bankum show up again.
The wise men return.
And this is where the story in your sources just takes this incredibly dark turn. They arrive at court carrying bags full of dead birds.
Oh, wow.
And apparently they're smiling. Initially, people in the court see the smiles, see the bags, and think, they found it. Hope flares up for a second.
That image, them presenting these bags, expecting praise, maybe, it's just chilling knowing what's inside.
Yeah.
It shows how badly they misread the situation, what the king actually wanted. They thought quantity would impress him, completely missing the point that it was about one specific bird.
Yeah. So the king starts looking through the bags. And you can just feel the desperation in the descriptions from the excerpts, can't you? He's searching.
Carefully examining each one.
Only to find they're all dead. Imagine that dawning horror. Just one dead bird after another.
Even checking the dead ones. It shows he's clinging to that last shred of hope, maybe looking for some familiar sign, anything.
And then, the moment, he spots one, and he cries out, it's his Moyna, but it's dead.
Heartbreaking.
His grief just explodes, and immediately he turns on Bidrup and Bankum, fiercely accusing them, you killed her.
That absolute certainty, even recognizing it dead, it speaks to that deep bond again. And the grief just instantly shifts to rage, right?
Yep.
Demanding accountability.
Yeah. But the ministers, maybe trying to de-escalate or perhaps genuinely unsure in that chaos, they question him. Are you sure, Your Majesty?
Understandable, maybe.
In such a charged moment.
But the king's reason, as you've shared it, it's so simple, so chillingly final. He says, if his bird were alive, she would have called out to him. He knows her. Wow. That personal knowledge, that connection, it becomes his absolute proof.
And on that conviction alone, he declares, they will be executed.
Just like that, based on his certainty, rooted in his grief and his knowledge of the bird, it really shows how personal conviction, especially with royal power, can just cut through everything else.
Instantly, he orders the guards. Bind them. Bidrup and Bankum. Their fate is sealed right there. The excerpts say they just stand there, silent, contemplating what's happened.
Yeah, what must have been going through their minds? That dawning horror that their cynical plan, their wise solution, has utterly backfired and led them to this.
Yeah.
Irreversible.
But the tragedy, as your sources show, it keeps rippling outwards. It doesn't stop there.
No.
Messengers start arriving. Urgent news from other kingdoms.
Oh, the foreign birds.
Exactly. Bidrup and Bankum's little killing spree wasn't contained. They killed birds belonging to other lands, other rulers, and those kingdoms are furious, outraged.
So now there's a diplomatic crisis brewing on top of everything else.
Right. But the king, he's still so consumed by his own loss, his own grief and anger. He just dismisses it, tells the messengers he'll deal with it later. His focus is entirely on his Moyna.
That's wow. That shows a potentially really dangerous level of sort of tunnel vision driven by grief, doesn't it? Ignoring major state issues because of this personal tragedy.
Yeah.
What kind of long-term problems could that cause?
You have to imagine it could lead to serious instability, conflicts down the road. But for now, his priority is singular. He orders a proper funeral for his Moyna.
A funeral for the bird.
Yes, according to his religious customs.
Yes.
He wants the kingdom's best priests involved. This detail from your sources really highlights how significant this bird was, not just a pet, maybe something more culturally or religiously important to him.
That makes sense. The elaborate preparations, it elevates the bird beyond just an animal companion. It becomes this symbol influencing his actions and the kingdom's response.
And at the exact same time he's planning this elaborate, respectful funeral, the orders for Bidrup and Bankum's execution are moving forward. The court is described as being in chaos. Their families are called in for a final farewell.
Oh, that's rough. It really brings home the human cost, doesn't it? Whatever we think of the advisors' actions, their families are now caught in this devastating outcome.
Absolutely. And then, in what seems like maybe a last-ditch effort, some ministers approach the king.
Yeah.
They suggest giving the bird a proper burial, specifically appealing to the king's religious beliefs. They argue it will bring well-being and peace to the kingdom, to the people.
Ah, so trying to channel his grief, maybe? Use his beliefs to find some sort of positive path forward for the kingdom, find some peace in all this tragedy.
Exactly. And the source says the religious king wholeheartedly believes this. He agrees and orders the burial preparations to begin.
So it ends there in the excerpts you shared, with the funeral and burial being planned and the executions presumably still happening.
That's the picture we get from these sources, yes. This incredible, tragic cascade. Loss, misguided actions, grief, rage, executions, diplomatic fallout, all stemming from one lost bird.
It's such a powerful illustration, isn't it, from the material you've shared, how unchecked grief, especially in a position of power, can just spiral outwards with devastating results. Personal loss morphing into state crisis, loss of life.
So thinking about the king, based on these excerpts, you have to wonder about his motivations, right? Was that intense rage, that immediate death sentence, was it justified? Even considering how awful and wrong Bidrup and Bankum were.
It's a tough question. How do you weigh their culpability against the king's reaction?
And what about the wise men? Were they just cynical? Did they completely misjudge the king, the value he placed on this one creature? Did their supposed wisdom just utterly fail them here?
Those are the key questions that jump out from this narrative you've brought us, definitely. It really pushes us to think about leadership when things go wrong, how much personal feelings can sway governance, and the huge risks of bad advice, even if it may be started with, well, maybe not good intentions here, but intentions to solve a problem.
Was the king's reaction proportional? What does being a wise advisor even mean in a situation like this?
Yeah.
It just makes you think, doesn't it, based on this whole story, about how grief, how desperation can sometimes lead us down paths with consequences we never intended, reaching far beyond ourselves. This story really raises big questions, I think, about leadership, about needing different viewpoints when making decisions, and just the potential for tragedy when things go so wrong, even if someone somewhere thought they were helping. It's something to consider, maybe.
Hmm.
How might intense emotions like grief or desperation cloud judgment in our own lives, or even on a bigger scale, leading to outcomes nobody wanted?